In story number 50, we continue to hear about the very tense, the very, very difficult relationship between the king-to-be, David, and the present King Saul. David fled to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest. Ahimelech was trembling as he met David. "Why are you all alone?" he asked. "The king sent me on some business," David replied, "and told me, 'Do not let anyone know about this business I am sending you to do.' I told my servants to meet me later at another place. Now what do you have here? Give me 5 loaves of bread, or whatever you have." "I don't have any ordinary bread here," the priest answered. "All I have is holy bread." So the priest gave him the holy bread that had been replaced with fresh breads. One of Saul's servants was there that day, detained before the Lord. He was Doeg, an Edomite, and Saul's chief shepherd. "Do you have a spear or a sword?" David asked Ahimelech. "I didn't bring either my sword or any other weapons with me, since the king's business had to be done quickly." The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom you killed in the valley of Elah, is here wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod," the priest said. "If you want that, take it. No other weapon is here." "There is none like it," David said. "Give it to me." Then David left and went to Achish, the king of Gath, because he was afraid of Saul. When some of the king's servants recognized him, he acted insane. The king did not want a crazy person around, so David left and went to some caves near Adullam. Here his family and men who were in trouble or in debt gathered around him. He became their leader. About 400 men were with him. He went to Mizpah, where he arranged with the king of Moab to keep his father and mother safe. Saul soon heard that David had returned to Judah. "Will this son of Jesse give all of you fields and vineyards?" he asked his servants. "You are all conspiring against me. No one told me that my own son made a covenant with this son of Jesse. None of you care about me. You won't tell me when my son incites my servant to plot against me, as is happening now." Then Doeg, the Edomite, who was standing with Saul's servant, said, "I saw the son of Jesse visiting with Ahimelech at Nob. Ahimelech prayed for him and gave him some food and Goliath's sword." Then the king called for Ahimelech, his father Ahitub's family, and all the priests at Nob to come. When they came, Saul asked, "Why have you conspired against me by giving the son of Jesse bread and a sword, and by praying to God for him, so he can rebel against me, as he is today?" "Who among all your servants is as loyal as David, your son-in-law?" Ahimelech answered. "He does what you want and is honored in your own house. Is that the first time I'd pray for him? Of course not. Don't accuse your servant or his family, for we knew nothing about all of this." "You and all your family must die," the king said. Then he said to the guards standing near him, "Kill these priests of the Lord. They have taken David's side. They knew when he was fleeing and didn't tell me." The king's servant, however, refused to kill the priest of the Lord. Then the king said to Doeg, "You kill the priest." So Doeg attacked the priest and killed 85 men who wore the ephod. Then he went to Nob, the city of the priest, and killed men, women, and children, and infants, cows, donkeys, and sheep. Only one son of Ahimelech, Abiathar, escaped. He told David that Saul had murdered the Lord's priests. "Stay with me," David told him, "for he is trying to kill you also." The animosity of Saul toward David had now reached a proportion that's almost hard to fathom, where Saul is ordering the execution of priests that David had talked to along the way. And when many of his own servants won't do it, he tells one of them to go ahead and do it. And he then travels to Nob, and there he kills even more people. Such was Saul's jealousy and hatred. It was now beginning to consume Saul. Saul pursued David, but David kept moving around. One time Saul was told that David was in the desert near En-Gedi. Then Saul took 3,000 chosen men and went to find David and his men. He came to a cave near the sheep pens and went in to rest. David and his men were hiding farther back in the cave. David's men said, "This is the day the Lord spoke of when he promised to deliver your enemy to you. Do what you think is right." David crept up quietly and cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Later, David's conscience bothered him because he had cut off a corner of Saul's robe, so he told his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do anything like this to my master, who is the Lord's anointed." With these words, David stopped his servants from attacking Saul. Saul left the cave to continue on his way. David followed him out of the cave and called to him, "My lord the king." When Saul looked behind him, David stooped with his face to the earth and bowed. "Today you have seen how the Lord delivered you into my hands in the cave," he said. "Some urged me to kill you, but I spared you. I said, I will not raise my hand against my master. He is the Lord's anointed one. Look, here in my hand I have a piece of your robe that I cut off. I did not kill you. Now you shall see that I am not guilty of rebelling against you or wanting to harm you. Yet you are hunting me down to kill me. May the Lord judge us both. The Lord may avenge what you have done to me, but my hands will never hurt you." When David was finished speaking, Saul said, "Is that you, David, my son?" He cried and said, "You are more righteous than I. You gave me good when I gave you evil. When the Lord delivered me into your hand, you did not kill me. May the Lord reward you well for what you did for me today. Now I know that you will surely be king. Promise that you will not kill my descendants after I am gone, destroying my father's name forever." David made this promise to Saul. Then Saul went home, but David and his men went to a stronghold. About this time Samuel died. All the Israelites mourned for him and buried him at his home in Ramah. After Samuel's death, the Philistines gathered their armies to fight with Israel. When Saul saw the Philistine army, he became afraid. Terror filled his heart. When Saul asked the Lord what he should do, the Lord did not answer. Saul had driven the Spirit of God out of his own heart, his hard-hearted rebelliousness, his refusal to listen, and we had been told earlier that the Lord had left him. Even though Saul had banished all fortune-tellers from the kingdom, he said to his servants, "Find me a woman who can tell fortunes, so I can ask her what to do." "There is a woman who can tell fortunes at Endor," his servants told him. Then Saul disguised himself by putting on other clothes and went at night with 2 other men to this woman. "I beg you," he said, "by your spirit powers, bring up someone I name." After being assured that Saul was not setting a trap for her so that she could be killed like other fortune-tellers and wizards, she asked, "Whom shall I bring up for you?" "Bring up Samuel," Saul said. When the woman saw an old man appear, she cried out aloud. Saul knew that it was Samuel. Samuel asked him, "Why have you brought me up?" "I am distressed," Saul answered. "The Philistines are making war against me, and God will not answer me. Make known to me what I should do." Then Samuel said, "Why do you ask me, now that the Lord has departed from you? The Lord is doing what he said he would do. The Lord has torn the kingdom from your hand and given it to your neighbor David because you disobeyed the Lord. Tomorrow you and your sons will be with me, and the Lord will deliver Israel into the hand of the Philistines." Now turning to a fortune teller would have been a clear violation of the second commandment that God had given his people at Sinai. To go and to consult this medium or this witch, if you will, rather than continuing to come to God in prayer, really shows you the condition of Saul's heart. He's not sorry for rebelling against God. He's just sorry that it's not going well for him. In that respect, he's a lot like Cain in our early story of Cain and Abel. Cain was never sorry that he had just gone through the motions in offering his sacrifice. His only complaint was that the punishment was too harsh for what he had done. It's sad It's a sad thing, but it shows and demonstrates once again the danger of not listening to God. And when we begin to harden our heart, where's it going to stop? When the Philistines fought against Israel, the men of Israel fled, and many were slain on Mount Gilboa. The Philistines pursued Saul and his sons. They killed Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua. Saul was severely wounded by archers. "Draw your sword and stab me," Saul said to his armor-bearer, "or these uncircumcised will come and stab and abuse me." His armor-bearer was afraid to do it, so Saul took a sword and fell on it. When his armor-bearer saw that Saul was dead, he fell on his sword and died with him. The next day, when the Philistines came to strip the slain, they found Saul and his 3 sons dead on Mount Gilboa. They cut off his head, stripped off his armor, displayed it in the temple of Ashtaroth, and fastened his body on the wall of Bethshan. When the people of Jabesh Gilead heard what the Philistines had done to Saul, they sent men at night, who took the bodies of Saul and his sons from the wall of Bethshan, took them to Jabesh, and burned them there. Then they took the bones and buried them under a tree at Jabesh, and fasted 7 days. David mourned, both for Saul and Jonathan, with this lament: "The beauty of Israel is slain upon your high places. How the mighty are fallen." Saul and Jonathan were lovely and pleasant in their lives, and in their death they were not divided. You daughters of Israel, weep over Saul. O Jonathan, I grieve for you, my brother. You have been a joy to me. Your love for me was wonderful. How the warriors have fallen. How the weapons of war have failed. And so the life of King Saul and Jonathan and his other sons are brought to an end. And even in death, fearing that the Philistines would find him and fearing what they would do to him, but not really fearing God, Saul chooses to take his own life. He tries to have his armor-bearer kill him, but he knows that's wrong, and he doesn't want to do that. And so Saul kills himself. He commits suicide because he was afraid of what lie ahead. And again, it shows you what Saul feared, what he loved and trusted in the most. And it wasn't God. It wasn't listening to God and doing what God said. It wasn't in God's ways. It was in his own abilities to kill David, who was a threat, or to even kill his own son Jonathan when Jonathan turned against him. And so the story of King Saul is really quite sad. It started out pretty well, but in the end, Saul ends up separating himself from God, and in death we fear that his eternity was sealed. Very sad. And David, even though he had every reason to resent and to hate and to have done evil to Saul, nevertheless he understood that Saul was the one anointed by God to be king, and so David would not take matters into his own hands, even though almost everyone around him probably thought it would have been a good idea, but he would not strike against God's anointed, trusting that God would handle things in his own time and way and manner.